last few months, our campus has been engaged in a spirited discussion about our service learning trip to Uganda and elsewhere. This discourse has focused on the ethical and moral dilemmas related to traveling to a place with a value system very different than our own. This issue has implications for all our international service learning trips and also for the idea of service itself. We are therefore happy to welcome as the 11th annual Distinguished Nadinne Scholar, a person who calls herself a loyal critic of service, Nadinne Cruz. Nadinne Cruz is a native of the Philippines, for formal education and studies in political science at the University of the Philippines, University of San Francisco, Marquette University, and the University of Minnesota. Her informal education includes more than 25 years of work in the Philippines and in the United States in community organizing, speaking, writing, and living experiential education, including almost 10 years as Associate Director and Director of the Haas Center for Public Service at Stanford University, where she founded and directed the Public Service Scholars Program. As past Executive Director of the Higher Education Consortium for Urban Affairs, Nadinne led 18 colleges and universities to develop community-based learning programs in the United States and abroad. Among her publications, Nadinne is co-author of Service Learning, A Movement's Pioneers Reflect on Its Origins, Practice, and Future, and Where's the Community? Service Learning Research. Recognition for Nadinne's work includes the National Youth Leadership Council's Alec Dickinson Service Leader Award, the Richard E. Cohn Award for Excellence in Leadership for Campus Community Partnerships, and an honorary doctorate from Carleton College. Now an independent consultant, Nadinne works nationwide with colleges and universities and national and state campus compacts to strengthen civic education. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce our distinguished Donahue Scholar, Nadinne Cruz.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your kind words, for a wonderful lunch yesterday, and most of all for warm conversation and hospitality that I've experienced here on campus. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Can you understand what I just said? Anybody? Anybody in the audience? I just said the equivalent of good afternoon to you. But the literal translation of magandang is beautiful. So it's actually literally beautiful afternoon to you, which I kind of like a lot since it's very beautiful here on campus. So first of all, I thank you for your hospitality, to Tesla for inviting me, for all the kindnesses I have already experienced and the warmth of conversations. I'm particularly admiring of having what I hear have been difficult conversations with a great deal of civility and enlarged understanding of each other's perspectives. I hope that by the end of my talk, you will be eager to converse and chat about what I am going to offer. And what I offer are the following. One is, I hope you'll understand why I'm a critic of service. Second, I hope you will also understand why I'm committed to pedagogies or ways of learning and teaching that include service in the community, despite my criticisms. And third, why it flows from my experiences so that, especially for the students, you can see yourself connect the dots between your life experiences and what you seek to know and inquire and try to figure out in the world. So I will start with a story, and the story is about my son, who's now in his 20s. But when he was a little kid, I was very self-conscious about being an immigrant mom, and so I was very concerned about being American and that my kids would be fitting into American society. And so I would do all what I thought were American things, like take my son to Little League baseball practice. And so he'd go to baseball practice, and I noticed that he was always handling this ball and keeping it close to his chest, and when he would throw it, he would run and make sure that he got the ball right away and nobody else held it too long. And I thought that was a little peculiar, because so why bother with the ball over there if you're gonna like act like you don't want anybody to take it? So one day we were going to Little League practice, and he said, Mom, I forgot my ball. I said, no, it's right there by your feet. So he picks it up. He looks at it, and then there's this frightful cry like a banshee, like a wounded animal. And my heart thumped because I was so scared, because I'd never heard such a scream from my son. And I said, David, what's wrong? And he said, Mom, looking at the ball, you ruined it! And I said, David, all I did was write your name on it so nobody else would claim it. And he said, but Mom, Nolan Ryan wrote his name on it. And I said, who's Nolan Ryan? And of course now I know that he's this terrific pitcher and that he owns the Texas Rangers, et cetera, and that this is a whole tradition of people who are devoted to baseball to collect autographed balls, which apparently his granddad had given him, and I had no clue what it was all about. So I wasn't paying attention. I'm afraid I'm going to have to say this is how I feel about service. In many ways, it is a parallel. I'm the adult mom, I'm an authority, I have power over my son. I know what he needs. I know how to fix the problem that, while he hasn't identified it, I know what the problem is. So I fixed it. I fixed it for him. But unfortunately, despite the fact that one of the codes of honor is do no harm, whether it's in medicine or in the community, in fact, I wounded him. And to this day, in his 20s, he hasn't quite forgiven me for this violation. And I have been told by people that maybe I should write Nolan Ryan and tell him what happened, and maybe he would send me a special ball. And I've been thinking about that when he signs a contract, I hope, with being a professional soccer. But in any case, that is just a tiny glimpse of how I see the problem between the unequal relationships between what is considered the expertise of knowledgeable people whose scholarship informs what they know about the world and who are acknowledged as experts in their field, that they're qualified to know what needs to be done and to identify problems. So that's the first point, first story. I'm going to tell you a couple more stories by the end of this time together, but I'm just going to go through now just a little bit of what this is about, engaged education. It has many names, so I'm a critic of engaged education, one form in particular, which is called service learning. But in many campuses, it might be called community-based learning, as it is here, which includes service learning, public service education, community engagement, and so forth. It tends to reflect the unique character and politics of each campus, and so depending on the name, now we have many, many terms under this umbrella called engaged pedagogies. Sometimes it's under a bigger umbrella called experiential education. So service learning is one form of experiential learning, I think, but we're not going to dwell on definitions, but just to have a kind of a location in the landscape of what we're talking about in higher education. And the mantra here is service combined with learning. So it's not service all by itself, nor learning all by itself the way we conventionally think of it in the classroom. But service combined with learning adds value to each and transforms both. Now that's an aspirational statement. That's what we hope happens. And it's kind of a philosophical stance or attitude towards this particular way of teaching that incorporates the experience of doing service to the community as an integral part of a course or activity in learning. Now, I think there's a challenge in saying what's good about it. The tendency, if you look at the website of many campuses, the tendency, as this statement is in Campus Compact website, is to say something like this. Students contributed more than 382 million hours of service, roughly equivalent to 7.96 billion in service to their communities. So the tendency is that it's easier to say what you can count. But what I'd like to say is what's important to me about this approach to education and learning, what matters to me and why about this. So I'm going to share this with you in the mode of a reflective practitioner. That is somebody who is a mental map that has guided and informed what I experimented with, especially in the early days of teaching in this way, when we stumbled and fell and experimented with something that didn't really have a name, nor did it have now a quite robust body of practice and scholarship, even on this one part of an umbrella of terms called service learning. So in Donald Schon and Chris Argyris' work, they talk about theories of action. Theories in use, which is the mental map that I used to inform what I was doing, but may not have been a full-blown articulated theory like somebody would say quantum theory. So what I'm sharing with you is reflecting back on what I think were my theories in use, as I went about the work that I did. And I think you will see here why implicit in this mental map is a criticism of service. So here we have a picture of the rice terraces in the Philippines. Rice terraces, they're planted and it goes thousands of feet up above sea level in the mountains in the northernmost area of the Philippines. This is the area where I was born. It's Bontoc Mountain Province in the Philippines. And there are 3 major islands among thousands of islands, but this is in the island of Luzon, which is the northernmost island of the Philippines, which is an archipelago of 700 to 600 islands. I think it's a very beautiful landscape of planting. And actually, for hundreds of years, it has been a form of sustainable farming. So it's a natural irrigation system. The Ifugao people have been practicing this, and I think it is both functional and very beautiful. So I want to honor the Ifugao, who are indigenous people of the Philippines who are experts in sustainability. There is a filmmaker, Kidlat Tahimig, who talks about it as, wow, I'm an Ifugao, I am indigenous, he says. So I'm not just indigenous, I'm indigenious. So I like that about Kidlat's work. But now I'm going to jump to France. Community of Le Chambon, France, during World War II, a small subsistence farming community of about 5,000, housed around 5,000 Jews who were fleeing the Holocaust. And they did it cleverly, in an organized way, quietly, honoring even the traditions of their refugee guests, like keeping kosher in the household for weeks and months. And I recall in this documentary, Weapons of the Spirit by Pierre Sauvage, who was an infant at the time when his family was in Le Chambon and immigrated to the United States and then returned as an adult to do this film. There is a part there where 2 elderly people, the camera pans to them, and he asks them, it's all French and subtitles in English, why did you do what you did? I guess trying to explore why you risked your life. And I'll never forget, they're standing side by side, they look at each other, their response was this. And I took that to mean, well, you didn't have to take a course in moral philosophy to know what you needed to do, and so forth. So this documentary, Weapons of the Spirit, is pretty powerful. So I want to honor the community of Lushambone for their moral brilliance. I think of it as extraordinary, the way they simply rose to the occasion to do what was right and what was just. So, those who are not scholars of academic-based knowledge and expertise, people in the community like the Ifugao, or the people of the community of Lushambone, what do they know? So if you would indulge me for a moment, imagine that this circle represents the entire universe of knowledge, capacities, skills that any individual would have in order to be able to act ethically and effectively to address the most urgent, intractable issues of our times. I would hope that any college aspires to have an education that's commensurate to that we would need to have that kind of knowledge. So imagine for a moment that this circle represents or includes that entire universe of knowledge and capacities and skills. What's in it? I would submit to you that that little pie wedge is the academy. Now, that's a horrific, heretical statement to make in most college campuses, especially those who think that they are the supreme authorities of scholarly knowledge in the world. And say, what? We're paying tuition for that little slice of the entire circle? What is in the rest? And I just like to say that the circle of knowledge is wider than academic scholarship. It includes forgiveness and empathy and healing and inclusion, fighting injustice, stewarding the earth, kindness, courage, integrity. Yet the academy tends to monopolize or to dominate as the authoritative voice of expert knowledge, which isn't to say that kindness and fighting injustice is not taught as a subject matter, but that the tendency is to teach it as a content area about forgiveness, about respect, but not typically about the skill of practicing it as a credit-bearing, credit-worthy course. So there's just an argument I'm making that there is a part of the circle, and then there is the whole of the circle that includes much more than what is codified in academic scholarship. So the service learning connects, I think, all parts of the circle where knowledge resides in various communities like Ifugao and Schon, so that there are diverse community-based ways of knowing that are not codified in academic scholarship, as formal scholarship. It's a different way of knowing. But service learning and other engaged pedagogies has the power, if done right, to connect the entire circle together along with that wedge, which is academic learning. So the problem of the academy being privileged and dominant, a privileged voice and dominant, I think is problematic because we learn from and legitimize only a slice of the circle. And what happens when the circle is broken, you have disrespect and exclusion of different ways of knowing. Case in point, in the Philippines, the Ifugaos are often pressed to educate their children so that they will become adapted to Western society, science-based society, which even when spaces are inclusive of them as human beings, they are not inclusive of their knowledge base, which is different. And I think is in many ways a form of disrespect. So imagine for a moment that that the moral brilliance of Lushambone and in communities everywhere becomes central to how we teach and learn. And imagine that the expert know-how embedded in the ways of life of the Ifugao people and in communities everywhere becomes central to how we teach and learn. So knowledge diversity, it seems to me, includes diverse, community-based ways of knowing. And so I'd like to offer to you that we need to reframe and reclaim the context of pedagogies like service learning. It's not serve those people. Instead, it's about the circle of knowledge made whole. So as Parker Palmer would say, divided no more. We decenter the academy and claim the whole. It is a part of the circle rather than a dominant voice within it. And decentering means an attitude change, that the academy is not the center of all knowledge. Some knowledge, yes, very important and leveraged for the good, extremely urgently important, but it's not the all of that universe of knowledge. Decentering relevant knowledge is located in many places. So the respect for diverse ways of knowing is in many ways, to me, a democratic epistemology. So this epistemological knowledge diversity, why does it matter? What is at stake? I think our survival. It's my perspective that there are so many things that indigenous peoples know about sustainability that we cannot even begin to absorb because of the boundary between academic-based codified knowledge and what it is that they know that cannot simply be transmitted by articulating it, but is embedded in their ways of life and worldviews. And also for justice sake, because ways of knowing are integral to the persons of whole peoples. It cannot be extracted from them and say, well, I respect you and want to include you, but not what you know. What your peoples know doesn't count. And for wholeness, the wholeness of the human community and the wholeness within each of us. So it requires an attitude change. How does service learning address this challenge? Connects campus with community. So through community partnerships, the academy becomes part of a whole circle of knowledge. So I would like to offer a phrase, civic art, that service learning is a form of the civic art of creative participation among people with different ways of knowing, and that this is integral to lifelong learning and engaging responsibly in a diverse world. I like the title of Lorraine Coates' book in philosophy called Epistemic Responsibility, in which she addresses the question, is our knowledge adequate for making informed choices on urgent issues that compel us to act ethically and effectively? So she raises the question not of, are you ready to act on the knowledge? She asks the question, is the knowledge that you are ready to act on adequate or commensurate to the thing that you're attempting to address? So the context for service learning, I think we forget when we focus primarily on it's a teaching method or a pedagogy, that it implicates epistemology, what we count as knowledge, what we should know when we learn something. But for me, the most important part is the question of who do I want to be in this world and what is the ideal world I want to create? So it's not like some teaching method that just happens to be of interest to people and some way of teasing out knowledge just because it needs to be that you teach a certain way, but that the driver of this, especially in the pioneering days, it was among faculty who really cared about trying to connect higher education with a question. What is the ideal world I want to create, and how do we go about that? What is the world I want to participate in creating? To answer that question, I answer the question in ways that I can only say is experiential learning. It's based on how I experienced the world and what I did not want. So when I was a young student at the University of the Philippines, I quit school to join the many hundreds of students who supported the present movement and the Sakadas, who are the seasonal migrant workers at the very bottom of the economic and social part of society in the Philippines. They earned about 50 cents a day for cutting tons of sugar cane and carrying it and putting it on trucks. And I saw pregnant women and young children working long hours in these huge plantations. So the answer to the question of what is the world I want to create was fueled in the beginning with a huge anger and fury at what I thought should not be, what I interpreted as and observed as huge injustices in the society I lived in. The hacendaros children would wave goodbye to her father, say, "Bye, Papa," as they hopped into their private plane to go shoe shopping in Hong Kong, while at the same time I'm seeing the people working in the fields. So that fueled an anger, and so for most of my first 20-some years after college, I focused on what's called the dystopic, obviously the opposite of the utopia that we think of, the ideal world. The opposite is dystopia. And the dystopic has many names. Tendencies to say that systems of injustice have names that end up in isms: racism, classism, colonialism, imperialism, feudalism, etc. And what informed my action was fighting against something in a resistance struggle, in allyship or solidarity coalition with peasants in that case, or the cicadas and the other group of people. And the terms we used were not service. We did not serve the peasants. We didn't help them, and we certainly weren't civically engaged. We were participating in a resistance struggle against injustice, in a social justice movement. And movement work, I think, is very different from helping and civic engagement. That could be a point we can debate about. But towards my 40s, we have our, I don't know, people have their midlife crisis. Mine came really late. I felt myself drying like a prune dying on the vine. I must admit that as much energy as I could muster reacting and acting on injustice in the world fueled by anger, I came to a point when I experienced that energy to be depleting, and that it was not enough to live a life fueled by anger and being against something. As you know, there are mountains and mountains of scholarship on every ism there is. Whether it's women's issues on sexism, or the race question and racism, or unequal nation-state relationships as in imperialism and colonialism, there are mountains and mountains of critiques and huge amounts of scholarship on the pathologies of social injustices, systems of social injustices. And I kept reading and reading and kept getting angrier and angrier, and there was not enough there to hold me, to nurture the part of me that was beyond surviving and into wanting to thrive as a human being with my colleagues as well. And so I turned in another direction, and I began to focus on the utopic. What is the ideal, therefore, that I want to have happen? If I don't think this and this and this and this is right, if these should be eliminated and undone in the world, what then should I have as an alternative? And I began to focus on the ideal. And it requires imagination, because it doesn't exist, or in such mild, diluted forms. You need to exercise imaginative capacity, and you are going to have vision. And the mode is not fighting against or resistance struggle. The mode is creation. And so I think of service learning and engaged pedagogies in the community as small-scale experiments in creating the ideal. So the community within the classroom, the community between the classroom and community partners, the communities between the campus and the communities. How do we create that? We don't need to have eliminated all races racism, sexism, classism, in order to begin to experiment with going ahead and creating what you think is a better world. Ideals in small-scale experiments. So in many ways, service learning and civic engagement pedagogies are not preparation for civic engagement in the future or citizen training for the future. It is doing it here and now. It is performative of a civic arts here and now. So I think of it as civic arts, the public art of imagining the ideal community and going ahead and creating it. Civic arts requires innate imagination, but as you know from critics like Paulo Freire, that there's so much schooling and banking and education snuffs it out. And how do we rise to the challenge then? Connected learning matters. Why? Because we need to learn to care about urgent questions through powerful learning that helps make meaning and purpose for a whole self. Experience alone, however, is not enough. So simply to say, well, go out and experience community service in the world. Go out in this neighboring community. Go across the Atlantic. Go across the Pacific. Imagination, ideas, consciousness, concept, paradigms, theories, these are lenses that shape our judgment and informs our action. In fact, I should go back. These are lenses that allow us to see what we see. Because when we see poverty, is it due to misfortune or injustice? Lenses inform our understanding and response. Do you create wealth or do you redistribute? Or is it a matter of dogma and ideology? Our lenses are complex phenomena. There is no immaculate perception. We don't see in the raw, so to speak. So service learning, I think, is the civic arts of creating just community and a just world as a mode of inquiry, in which, in this mode of inquiry, the shaping of the lenses through concepts, theories, and things that we typically associate with conventional academy is actually integral to the learning through experiences, because there is no raw experience. So education does matter, theories do matter. So I want to end by telling another story, two stories. So the first year when I was a college volunteer with a group that was giving legal assistance to a group of peasants who had lost their land. A whole entire village was going to be demolished because an agribusiness company had appeared on the scene with a title to the land. And so they wanted to fight this extradition from the land. And they sought the help of the Free Legal Assistance Group. I worked with the legal assistance group to document whatever needed to be documented to take their case to the court system. But many of the peasants began to mutter among themselves and say, well, we have never had positive experiences with the court system, or any system for that matter, that's part of the government bureaucracy and a society of very skewed power towards a certain group of people and not us. And what they wanted to do was to call out all the peasants in the Philippines, as many who were organized, to sit on the land as a civil disobedience sit-in, non-violent action. But the Free Legal Assistance Group that I worked with persuaded them not to do that. I think they were fearful that they were going to call in, that it would militarize the place. The military would come to evacuate them, and it would become a bloody scene. So I could understand that, but in the end, the peasants lost their case in the courts, and of course, that's what they expected. and everybody was sad, and I was standing with a peasant leader, Mang Ando, in the field. I'll never forget. He's barefoot, probably went through 3rd grade. His hands are broken and gnarled, and he's been working in the fields. And now, as the leader of his village, he looks out there, I'm standing next to him, and saying, all of that is going to be destroyed. I don't know yet where we're going to go. He's speaking in very flowery Tagalog. And I scratch my head, and I have to tell you, I'm embarrassed and ashamed to say this part of the story, but it's my way of honoring Mang Ando. That was his name. I said, oh, Mang Ando, I said, oh, well, when I go back to school, I wonder what classes I should take so that we would have better strategies for things like this. You know, maybe I need to take it, and they start naming all these courses. So when you think about it, when I think about it, how shameful, how completely self-centered and narcissistic, I was focusing on myself, saying, what courses should I take? And here, his village was about to be demolished. Looking back on it, I wouldn't have blamed him if he had uttered expletives and slapped me up and down and told me to, like, get out of here. But you know what? The reason why I'm still here in higher education is because of his response. Every other sophisticated thing I've learned about diversity and difference and everything, Mang Ando trumps. He turned to me with the greatest, kindest face, soulful eyes, and he said, Nadine, in Tagalog, some things are not for you to choose. They are chosen for you to do. And that's all he said. And to this day, I have had dozens of interpretations of what he said. I think it was not just the words. It was the way his kindness, compassion, and empathy shone throughout his entire being when I did not deserve it, and where he could have acted otherwise. So I feel like the voice of Mang Ando has to be an integral part of the experiences that we have in education. Not just that we go to some exotic place and see a Mang Ando out there, but that we understand the world and history he came from, the voice that he's been trying to have, and all the questions about land distribution, the use of miracle rice, GMOs, and everything are absolutely relevant to Mang Ando and the peasants in the Philippines to this day. The question of miracle rice has never addressed the questions that they have had through all the generations. So that's one story to let you know why I am still here. And lastly, I want to tell a story from the book, Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh, who, if you might know, is a Buddhist monk who, especially during the resistance against the Vietnam War, was very much active in civil disobedience and quiet spiritual presence of speaking for peace. I love that the title of the book is not about peace or do peace, it's being peace. And in that book is just a little 2-paragraph passage, a story that I will just paraphrase. So Thich Nhat Hanh tells Buddha's story. Buddha is in Buddhist practices. Buddha's story, that a rich merchant comes back home to see that his house is completely burned down to the ground. And he picks up the ashes that he thinks are his only child and puts it in a pouch and carries it with him, always mourning and grieving the loss of his child. But one day, Papa, let me in. And he said, go away, you are fooling with me. Papa, let me in. No, you're fooling with me. And so father and son never see each other again. And the Buddha ends the story this way. Sometimes you hold on to one truth so much that when the truth comes knocking on your door, you will not open it. Service learning as a mode of inquiry in communities with diverse ways of knowing, and learning to respect and include all different ways that are relevant for making it possible for us to ethically and effectively act on those very urgent issues in the world. This is what it's about. It's opening the doors of the Academy so that we are part of the whole circle of knowledge. Thank you very much.